Now we are live. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Reset, Building Future Systems for an Ethical Africa. My name is Linda Kuvea, and I'm here on behalf of Riasako as a facilitator in our Systems Futures community, a learning and practice community where Africans, practitioners, youth, organizations, and partners in the social sector come together to build the mindsets and capabilities needed to design and influence systems of our continent. Today is International Anti-Corruption Day, and we will be talking about how corruption is not just a government failure. It's something shaped by our institutions, our communities, ourselves as individuals, and the narratives that we accept as normal. And that's exactly why we are having this conversation today. I'm honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Dan Kuwali, who will anchor today's session with his keynote, Commend and Condemn, Inculcating an Afrocentric Ethical Leadership Culture. For a fuller introduction and to guide us through the whole program today, I'll now hand over to our facilitator, Sarah Nyakerario Onduko. Sarah, over to you. Sorry, Sarah, our audience can't hear you in this live stream. Kindly check your audio. Yes, kindly check your audio. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, I'm just checking. Yes. Yes, go ahead, Sarah. Sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry, Sarah, to disrupt you. You are still not yet audible on the live stream. You are still not yet audible on the live stream. Have you changed anything on your... check your... Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Okay, give me a second to confirm. Not yet, Sarah, not yet. Yes, if you can try to check your audio settings and connect your mic. Yes. Have you connected your mic, Sarah? Okay. It's the audience I have to check. I have to check with. Yeah, keep speaking, Sarah, so that okay, Sarah, sorry, it looks like you are still not audible on the live stream. Yes, you are still not audible on the live stream. Kindly disconnect and connect your mic again and double check you have the correct mic on connected. Or maybe remove the mic. I know earlier it worked without the mic. Yeah, try without the mic. If it's okay, we are just going to test ourselves while we are on live stream, guys. Um, Eddie, can you try to speak so we make sure that everybody is going to be audible? Yes, I can hear you, Sarah. I can hear you. It's the yeah. I'm still waiting. We can't still hear you on the live stream. Uh, Tando, Eddie, Prof, can you try to speak so we can make sure that everybody is going to be audible? Um, yes, Eddie, can you? Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Okay, so no, you are not, all of us, it looks like I'm the only one who's audible on the live stream. Mm-hmm. Yes, you are visible. We are visible on YouTube. It's just the audio. Yes, we are all visible on the live stream. It is the audio that is not working. Apologies to our audience on the live stream. Kindly give us a moment and be patient with us while we sort the audio for our facilitators and speakers. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, let me check with the audience. Can we all try to speak so that we can test the audio before we proceed? Okay, unfortunately, it sounds like on the live stream, it's only me that people can hear. Um, properties. Sarah, can you try speaking now? Everybody, can you just try saying something? Then I'll check whether you are being heard on the other side.
Eddie here. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning, Africa.
Hello. Can we try again? Just say hello, 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 hello.
Hello, hello,
Hello.
hello.
Can I be?
Awesome. It's working now.
All
Awesome.
right.
Good.
Great.
Good.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Roxy, should I
Yes.
start off now? I'm
Yes, sure.
fine.
Please, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, colleagues, for being very patient. We appreciate that you have joined us today, even as we discuss about ethical leadership and really what is the role of the young people as we think about the future, but also how that systems thinking help us reshape the conversation about ethical leadership. And to start us off today, we want to hear from Professor Dan Kuwali, who is our guest speaker for this day. Just to give you a bit about Professor Kuwali, our keynote speaker, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Dan Kuwali. He's a distinguished military leader, brigadier general, and one of the African's most respected scholars in the international law, global security, and governance. Professor Kuwali serves as the commandant of the National Defense College of Malawi and is a visiting scholar at Lund University, as well as an extraordinary professor at the University of Pretoria. His thought leadership spans peace, security, human rights, and ethical governance across the continent. He is also the editor of the influential volume Corruption Proofing in Africa, where he advances systems thinking approaches to building ethical, resilient leadership cultures. Today, he grounds our gathering this morning with a powerful keynote entitled Commend and Condemn, Inculcating an Afrocentric Ethical Leadership Culture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dan Kuwali for his speech. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you so much. Yeah, your says distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning from Geneva. I am a deep honored to share my reflections on our resetting leadership and building ethical systems. at a critical juncture for Africa, a continent standing between extraordinary potential and persistent peril. Ours is a continent brimming with ingenuity, endowed with vast natural wealth, and home to some of the world's most dynamic youth populations. Yet, these tremendous assets are too often undermined by a single corrosive force that gnaws at the heart of governance and development. That is to say, grand corruption. Today, I urge us not to dwell in lamentation, but to embrace transformation. Let us imagine government as a function, but as a legal and ethical enterprise. Let us adopt a new paradigm, corruption-proofing governance, grounded in Afrocentric ethical leadership, nurtured by our shared values and operationalized through a deliberate architecture. That is to say, accountability, responsibility, monitoring, and sustainability, what I call an arms framework, ARMS. Corruption is not merely the result of bad people doing bad things. It is the predictable outcome of flawed systems. Across our continent, corruption still drinks, not just money. It steals textbooks from our children, medicines from our hospitals, and hope from the heart of young continents. It robs potential, ingenuity, and steals the bright future that belongs to every African child. It employs mediocrity and deserts merit. It takes public resources to private pockets or offshore havens. Grand corruption by affluent and influence those with power, and often the least oversight, corrodes institutions, deepens inequality, undermines democracy, and erodes public trust. It is a silent pandemic that sabotages development, strangles innovation, and robs millions of Africans of opportunity. Yet, in this conference, we convene not merely to condemn, but to construct an architecture at its roots. From an anthropological perspective, defining corruption in Africa demands nuance and cultural sensitivity. In many communities, gift giving, reciprocity, and gestures of appreciation are not merely social niceties. They are binding cultural practices that affirm respect and sustain harmony. The boundary between cultural generosity and corrupt inducement is therefore often blurred. Scholars have long noted that distinction between creation of public goods for personal gain and legitimate privatization, or between a bribe and cultural appropriate gift, is rarely straightforward. What one actor labels as corruption may to another appear as a customary obligation. Public choice theory sharpens the lens. Corruption is the deliberate subversion of rules for extra legal gain. It encompasses, among others, bribery, extortion, abuse of dispute of interest, and state capture, where private interests seize control of public decision making. Institutions such as the World Bank have refined these definitions. They distinguish isolated corruption, that is to say, corrupt acts from systemic corruption which permeates institutions. Point shifts from a public office to private office, recognizing that corruption transcends the public sphere. Private actors often collude with officials, forming networks that perpetuate illicit engagement. For purposes of clarity, corruption is often grouped into two categories. First is grand political corruption, which is conducted by elites and high-level officials, manipulating policy, regulation, and state institutions for personal or factional gain. South Africa's experience with state capture is a stark illustration. The second category is petty corruption, which is small-scale everyday transactions, roadside bribes, facilitation payments, something small demanded by gatekeepers. Although easier to detect, its cumulative effect normalizes deviance and erodes trust. These are based on grand corruption, the most destructive and far-reaching form of corruption. Grand or political corruption distorts national priorities, derails development, hollowing out institutions from generations. It is at this intersection of power, privilege, and public authority that Africa's governance struggle is most acute, and where corruption proofing systems must be most vigorously implemented. Esteemed colleagues, let us speak plainly. Africa's enduring corruption is not a matter of fate, nor a flaw in our character. It emerges where human greed meets fragile institutions. Greed, a universal impulse, becomes catastrophic where systems lack resilience. Vast inequalities concentrate power and wealth in the hands of a few, enabling rent-seeking and patronage. This structural imbalance allows elites to shape policies for private success, not public progress. Corruption survives where ethical codes are absent. Oversight is weak, regulations outdated, and bureaucracy opaque. Public procurement becomes a playground for overpricing. Sanctions are insufficient. Illicit financial flows exploit alternative currencies and digital shadows, disappearing across borders with alarming speed. State and elite capture adds a more troubling layer. Institutions entrusted with public warfare are turned into instruments of private gain. Legislative oversight weakened. Judicial independence faltered. Audit institutions, the guardians of public integrity, are compromised. Politically exposed persons, fortified by networks of allies and proxies, operate with near total impunity. This audacity erodes public trust and renders enforcement bodies toothless. Moreover, weak regulations on political finances, conflict of interest disclosure, and monetary contributions, those under philanthropic or religious cover, create additional avenues for corruption. A fragmented enforcement ecosystem allows wrongdoing to slip through the cracks. International complicity exacerbates the problem. Permissive global financial regimes, offshore banking secrecy, and weak cross-border cooperation ensure that stolen wealth finds sanctuary beyond shores. It is unfortunate that Africa is so often tainted as the most corrupt continent, while the beneficiaries in the West and the East are too readily portrayed as saints. Many African countries rank high on the corruption percentage. They are not some of the most sophisticated forms of grand corruption, particularly extractive, power-preserving, and transnational illicit practices occur elsewhere and often exceptional measurement tools, which capture perceptions rather than the complexity of covert financial flows. The truth is simple. Corruption exists in all societies. But in Africa, because we have been condemned for too long and have witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of this must be eradicating it. As we say, rats do not dance. But if they do, the cat must be aware. Considering that corruption is a two-way traffic, then the journey toward its eradication must begin with us. We adopt a new philosophy, corruption proofing. This is not about tightening laws or punishing wrongdoers after the fact. It is about creating systems where corruption simply cannot occur. It recognizes that corruption enabled by networks and institutional vulnerabilities. Corruption proofing demands holistic systems thinking approaches, exposing weaknesses, mapping networks of illicit influence, and embedding deterrence at every node of authority. It is moral engineering. It is the work of reconstruction. It is governance redesigned so that integrity is natural and corruption is unthinkable. You learn how to cut down trees by cutting them down. Likewise, masquerade an ethical of corruption in our communities, not only through our words, but integrity is at the heart of an ethical culture. Every act of integrity is a quiet act of leadership. Integrity is the only leadership that requires no title, no podium, no applause. It begins in the quiet chambers of conscience, yet it echoes loudly in the destiny of nations. It follows that one person's commitment to ethical action sends ripples through institutions and communities alike. In the book that I mentioned, Corruption Proofing in Africa, a system thinking about outreach last year, a compelling insight emerges. While prosecuting corruption is undeniably necessary, it is often complex, costly, and protracted process with no guaranteed resolution. Our research showed that chasing corruption after it happens is a race we are unlikely to win. The key is prevention, which transforms the system, building resilience and integrity before wrongdoing occurs. One critical truth is that prevention is far more powerful than cure. As a matter of fact, the as this volume converged on one recommendation. By adopting proactive strategies to anticipate and block corruption before it takes hold, we can achieve a more effective, sustainable, and transformative impact in Africa's governance and institutions, which is, in fact, the very raison d'etre of corruption proofing. Ladies and gentlemen, for too long, anti-corruption efforts have been reactive. Chasing wrongdoing, the House has already been looted. Laws and conventions exist, institutions subsist, yet corruption adapts faster than enforcement. As we noted in the Foresight book, punishment alone cannot fix structural incentives. Elite capture is not integrity, inevitably breed impunity. We need from reactive enforcement to proactive prevention, from chasing wrongdoing to designing it out of the system, from episodic campaigns to sustainable structural integrity. This is the essence. And from a systems thinking approach, I designed the framework that I alluded to, the ARMS framework, to manage the feedback loops in the fight against corruption. So the architecture of corruption proofing comprises four interlocking pillars, forming a system. The first is accountability, which is answerability with consequences. Accountability, ladies and gentlemen, is not a slogan. It must be lived reality. Courts must be independent. Parliaments must scrutinize. Citizens must question. Impunity must be impossible. From Kenya's assertive judiciary to South Africa's zone commission, we see that when accountability is democracy breathes. The second pillar is responsibility, which is ethical leadership as stewardship. The responsibility as leaders
Hello,
embody values, not just alone.
can you hear me?
Public office must be a trust, not a private opportunity. Rwanda's Impingo reforms and Ghana's office demonstrate that institutional ethics embeds responsibility into culture.
It's a bit shaky.
Monitoring is the third pillar, seeing everything now. Technology enables us to track, trace, and transform governance. E-procurement systems, real-time audits, open budget portals, and whistleblower protections create transparency that cannot be negotiated away. For example, in South Africa and Malawi, real-time audits expose procurement theft before it metastasized. Modern monitoring is continuous, data-driven, and citizen-empowered. The fourth and last pillar is sustainability, which is integrity that outlives political cycles. Reforms cannot depend on heroes or goodwill. They must be embedded in constitutions, national plans, and institutional memory. From Malawi's 2063 to Rwanda's Vision 2050, sustainability ensures anti-corruption is an ecosystem, not an event. As a framework, these pillars form a holistic armor, the arms with which Africa can defend its resources, institutions, and its future. Comparative insights from across the continent review four key truths about leadership and governance. Botswana, integrity endures when institutions rather than individuals drive decision making. Ghana has showed us that democratic space can strengthen political governance institution design. Kenya has demonstrated that political diversity alone is insufficient without a shared commitment. Reforms risk being endless yet superficial. In Rwanda, that strong leadership can curb corruption, but legitimacy and lasting progress depend on participatory accountability. Let's underscore that while contexts differ, sustainable governance and ethical leadership consistently hinge on the balance between institutions, political, inclusive participation, and enduring systems. Beyond Africa, Singapore and Nordic nations show that transparency, meritocracy, and corruption underpin national prosperity. The principle is clear. Corruption proofing succeeds where systems align with societal norms, institutions are insulated from politics, and ethical cultures are Yes, I introduce a guiding philosophy, commend and condemn. For too long, anti-corruption has focused solely on condemnation, naming and shaming wrongdoers, while failing to celebrate integrity. If the drumbeat changes, the dance must also change. The very governance systems that once enabled corruption cannot solve the challenges we face today. Our reforms must evolve. The commend and condemn approach offers a new moral grammar for corruption proofing in Africa. Corruption proofing requires commend those who choose integrity when corruption is easy, condemn kleptocracy, abuse of office, and state capture unequivocally, celebrate ethical role models, not just punish wrongdoers, reward compassion, not merely sanction deviance. This dual approach shapes behavior, reinforces norms, and signals what ethics is not merely expected, it is honored. So, the current situation on the continent is reflected in the saying, which goes with a touch of irony, that when many leaders are faced with the choice between champagne for a few or safe drinking water for all, they often go for the champagne. But now, how does ethical leadership look like in practice? In the Afrocentric sense, it is best captured as Ubuntu grounded stewardship, a leadership that is rooted in integrity, values, and a steadfast commitment to doing what is right even when it is difficult. It is the consistent alignment of a leader's action principles such as fairness, honesty, accountability, and respect, ensuring that every owns the well-being and humanity of others. Ubuntu inspired leadership, a leader recognizes that their authority is not a privilege to wield for self-interest, but a responsibility to uplift the community such that what is meant for all cannot be taken by one. To take for myself is to deny the many. An ethical leader understands that what belongs to the community is never mine alone. To claim it as my own as whole. They realize that what is shared cannot be hoarded. To seize for myself is to unravel the very fabric of our unity. As Nelson Mandela said, a good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. I dare add that ethical Ubuntu-centered stewardship requires not only a good head and a good heart, but good words and good deeds, all aligned in service of public good. To young leaders in the room, you are not leaders of tomorrow. You are accountability guardians of today. Corruption proof depends on diagonal accountability, oversight from citizens, the media, civic action, technology. You refuse to normalize bribery. You demand transparency, not polite. The future of governance is participatory, and you are its protagonist. This explains why this year's global campaign, led by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Campaign, is themed Uniting with Youth Against Corruption, Shaping Tomorrow's Integrity. Dear brothers and sisters, Africa cannot fight corruption alone. The state cannot. Civil society cannot. International partners cannot. The youth cannot. But as a collective, design corruption out of our systems. One, where integrity is rewarded. Number two, systems where misuse of power is instantly detectable. Number three, institutions insulated from political manipulation. Number four, countries where is really acceptable. Number five, regional mechanisms that transcend national loopholes. Number six, citizen movement that feels silence. This is a vision of corruption-proofing Africa, a hope of society approach. Therefore, we must be united with an insatiable appetite of unscrupulous individuals for public resources. Accountability is not a whip in the hands of the state. It is a mirror in the hands of the people. It reflects societal values in still participants, Africa's story is still being written. Corruption need not be a central chapter. Let us seize this moment, a turning point from fear to courage, cynicism to responsibility, resignation to redesign. Corruption thrives on the oxygen of our silence. It suffocates when ordinary people choose to speak. Courage is the spark that ignites accountability in every office, street, and institution. Let us reclaim governance as a moral covenant between leaders and citizens. Let us reaffirm that integrity is. Let us demonstrate that ethical leadership is not an exception, it is. Remember, a fish rots from the head. Likewise, corruption and moral decay begin with leadership. Ubuntu-inspired leadership must therefore start at the top. Those who lead carry the profound responsibility to set the ethical tone for the entire system. Even in the head of in other words, the community also has a duty to act. The chief may lead the people beat the drum. While leadership sets the tone, the people shape the culture. Every citizen, young or old, has the power to break the chain of corruption. This is why a whole of society approach all things said and done, it takes at least two to engage in corruption, yet it takes only one to bring it to an end. And so the true background consider this: a fire that divides an entire forest, millions of trees, begins with a single spark from a single match, touching a single trunk. Every single branch. Likewise, the flames of corruption are fed by solitary choices. The temptation to let our answer be a resolute negative. And when we are tested to receive or not to receive, may our conviction again be a firm and unwavering negative. For in choosing the negative, we confirm the positive future we seek to build. It begins quietly, yet its echo can shape a nation, the continent, and the globe. One candle may seem small, but 1,000 candles deserve the darkness. When integrity becomes a habit of individuals, it becomes the culture of people. Therefore, our collective choices illuminate the path through ethical governance. Long after our names fade, our future through framework, through commend and condemn ethics, through systems designed for justice and transparency, we can build not merely corruption-free institutions, but a corruption-proof future. The time to embrace multi-centered leadership is now, guided by the principle that one is bound to protect what belongs to everyone, not seize it once. The future is outside. An ethical culture of respecting and protecting public resources and integrity is our greatest inheritance. Let us build a continent where honesty is not an act of heroism, but simply the way things are meant to be. Let us leave a legacy of integrity so the children of Africa inherit hope, not hollow promises. Thank you for your attention. Asante sana, Siabonga.
A lot of options, or rather, a lot of things for us to think through, even as we talk about ethical leadership in Africa. And I think for me, there are four key notes that you have mentioned in the strategies that you have given out. And I would want to ask our audiences in YouTube if you can just highlight for us what is one word or a phrase that is your key takeaway from this, reflection from Professor Kuwali. Please write it in our YouTube channel. Give us the reflection of what has been your key takeaway. I think for me, I must say that the key takeaway are the four arms that Professor Kuwali has mentioned. The issue of accountability, wherever you're looking at issues of corruption, responsibility, and the role that we all must play and take responsibility, and the need for us to ensure that citizens are empowered and they're actually monitoring issues, in terms of government service delivery and issues of, and he also mentioned issues of illicit financial flows. How can we be able to follow through where our money goes? And lastly, I think the issue of sustainability is one critical pillar that we must all start thinking and embodying in terms of how do we think about sustaining strategies that work either to deter, corruption. And it is important. I think today's conversation, hearing from Professor Kuwali, circles around the issue of we must condemn, but also we must commend those who are doing well, but also condemn those who are doing wrong. Now, to take us into the next conversation, kindly do write for us in the YouTube and what has been your key takeaway. As we move forward, we want to hear from two panelists who will just give us a few reflections. Professor Kowale started by saying that Africa has the largest youth population. And so the question we want to ask ourselves today is, how can the how can youth or young people lead ethical leadership? What are the pipelines or what are the system thinking around young people involvement in the issues of corruption? And what role can they play? So with us today, I want to introduce one of our panelists who will just give us a few of his reflection. I want to introduce Edward. Edward Moore is our next speaker. Edward is the Executive Director of the Ethical Leadership Center in Kenya. He is an ethical leadership trainer with experience across public policy, youth governance, and international collaboration. He is deeply committed to shaping value-based leadership in Africa and advancing accessible governance knowledge for young people. Please welcome Edward, even as he shares his reflection. Even as you share your reflection, Edward, perhaps you can also tell us. Professor Kowale has given us a lot of, recommendation, and one of the things that he mentions was the issue of, power. And we know that in Africa, young people are uprising to ask the question and also interact with power. So over to you, Edward. Edward, can you hear me? Kindly unmute if you're speaking. All right. Edward, are you on the call? If Edward is not on the call, we can have our next panelist to speak. Then Edward can speak when he is back on the call. All right. We can also, our next panelist is Ntando Kumalo, who is a communications expert. And even as we talk about issues of ethical leadership, issues of governance and corruption, how do we communicate this? How do we translate these issues from complex policy issues so that communities, can be able to understand and interact using the right information? So Nthando comes with us with experience from his work that he can be able to give us a reflection in terms of how do we realign our communications. So Ntando Kumalo is a governance and public policy practitioner from Zimbabwe who focuses on translating complex policy issues into accessible insights for young people and communities. His work bridges policy and civic education and youth empowerment, helping the next generation understand and shape the systems that govern their lives. Please welcome Ntando Koyensi Kumalo. Over to you, Ntando.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for that. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I appreciate the kind words. So, from a young age, even as a teenager, I've always been drawn to issues around leadership and human capacity development. Don't ask me why. Also, I'm asking why, so you can't ask me why. But as a teenager, straight out of high school, I realized that it's something I wanted to pursue, and I became a public speaking coach. And I would go into the various institutions and train public speaking and just grow the capacity of young people to communicate. Later, as I matured, as I got more experience in the professional capacity and got more mentorship, I began being introduced to something called the SDGs. I was introduced to different policies, at local government level in Zimbabwe, as well as internationally. And so what I decided was that for me, I wanted to focus on ensuring that adolescents are part of the conversation and the decision-making processes that affect the policies at international, regional, and national levels. Because I realized that one thing that would happen is when those things are communicated, they're communicated through reports, studies, workshops, and those dissemination tools are great for a certain for a certain age, but once they get to a certain age, whether it's your adolescents or young people, that's not the way those people communicate. So the style of presentation and the depth of the content didn't speak to people who looked like me, thought like me, and who were as young as me. So I remember I sat, just while I was just discovering myself, and I sat and I asked myself, as an adolescent and as a teenager, why am I here? Why am I listening to policy? Why should I care about the budget? So what? So what? You've given 10 million to education. So what? What does that mean to me as an individual? And I remember one of the things was, in one point I actually thought to myself, oh gosh, this is boring. Like no other way. This is boring. But I did realize that this was a national conversation. And I thought to myself, the risk of not innovating around our information dissemination techniques, styles, and strategies is that young people begin to defer responsibility when it comes to policy issues to adults. That it's an adult thing. It's a thing that old people do. But you and I understand that beliefs are shaped at a young age. Stuff like boys don't cry, stuff like, you got beaten by a girl at school. Those gender differences are something that you and I can relate on, readily relate to, but there are certain deeper things that if we leave and we let our communication make it think that policy making is for adults, we are in trouble. Why? Is because, as Prof already mentioned, that the majority of the African continent is made up of young people. What then happens if we don't communicate in a way that they understand or in a way that they can relate to and engage in, we will have a majority that is not only uninformed, but misinformed, which is deadly. So we neither want someone uninformed or misinformed, because that majority is the one that's going to be required to make decisions at the ballot box. That majority is going to be required to make decisions for the country. So things like fanatism and manipulation arise when we are not communicating correctly and not including people in certain conversations, which leaves them as prey. So we must accept that communicating with young people will require a lot of innovation, which comes with a big price tag. So at that time, my solution was to say, you know what, young people like cool things, young people like fun things, young people like rewards. So what I then did was I would take a policy document, for example, or take something on SDG number 1 or any report or any write-up, and then I'll turn it into a quiz. So I'll send it out to the invited guests, whether it's 10 schools or 4 teams each. And I say to them, listen, read this. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to ask you questions on this. What's going to happen? The top 3 are going to get tablets, a cash prize, a phone, and all of a sudden there was now desire to want to read this policy document. All of a sudden there was now a desire to want, and I went, you know what? I took it a step further. The United Nations has something it calls international days, and there's International Youth Day, and these various youth days around issues like environment and all the 17 SDGs. So I'll then organize debates around these UN days, and then the themes of the debates would be the topics of the debate would be the various theme and the sub-themes of that international day. Again, you'd give cash prizes and gadgets. And when we were being really well funded, we actually got paid internships for about 2 to 3 years for about 3 to 7 young people. And youths, I realized, were very impressionable. And so growing their attention, so their attention goes in certain places. So we must understand that things around purpose, around passion, around vision, at a certain age may not appeal to young people. So the thieves are out there on Instagram, the murderers are out there on Instagram drinking champagne, buying women, buying drugs, buying sex, and they put a certain mark or a certain type to success. And that's a benchmark for success, which you and I must deliberately fight in our work as anti-corruption activists. And so you justify corruption in the name of hustling, in the name of working hard for your family, whatever cost for success. Not so. We don't build a society by doing whatever it takes to make a dollar. Instead, I remember participating in something called the School of Integrity by TIZ. And when I finished that course, I realized that there is a way to be successful that does not compromise the longevity of the society. And so The very first time I heard a term called sextortion was during this training program. And I remember it affected the way I design my office, the way I speak to other people, because I never wanted to be someone in a position who made another person feel sexually vulnerable in the workplace. That was a small program that made me change the way that I behaved as a young person. But it had incentive. There was giveaways, there was things that helped me participate. I'm not saying young people won't participate without incentives. I'm just saying it will get us a quicker audience because the role models they are looking at have put budget towards their they put budget to this, whether they know it or not. They are giving away houses, they are giving away free watches, they are giving away things. And if we don't put a budget to anti-corruption activities and integrity leadership or an integral way to, unfortunately, we are going to be fighting a losing battle. So let me close by saying, once we do not constantly adapt the way in which we disseminate information, our impact is reduced. But if we do, the chances of us improving the behaviors of young people who will then be the policymakers that make decisions that favor the community and not individuals is what we're then going to be experiencing. So the main thing we want in conclusion is we want a better informed young person that will make a better informed majority, that will make better decisions. And the key outputs we can use to measure is, are young people holding policymakers accountable? Are young people contributing to policy creation and implementation? If we can't answer yes, yes, yes to all those, then we know you and I still have so much work to do. So the key is that information ecosystem includes, that information ecosystem draws the attention of young people, includes their voices, rewards their ideas, and implements their ideas in a way that they can see that, you know what, we've been respected and we've been listened to. That way, they also have the burden on their shoulders to make sure they defend the society. So those few words, I know it was a lot, but Madam Moderator, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kumalo, for giving us a lot to think about how young people can actually be able to be involved. And I think there are very good points that you have mentioned about how do we adapt our language in a manner and in a structure that the young people can actually be able to be involved. And you've pointed out clear that at times the reason why there are challenges is the issue of misinformation or even uninformation. And you have pointed out clearly that some of these, issues are well embedded in policies that even most of us, even as adults, may not even be able to understand. So how do we simplify, but also make it a worthy conversation? I think tying to what Professor Kuwali said in the morning when he was giving his reflection, that let's allow us to speak freely on issues of corruption, allow us to speak freely on issues of ethical leadership and how we can be able to embed them in our systems. And also to bring that conversation, Eddie, if you are back online, we'd want to hear from you, even as we hear about young people and how we can be able to embrace the role of the future of, corruption or ethical issue really also depends on the young people. Eddie had already introduced you, but I can also quickly now introduce you. Eddie, who is coming to speak to us, is the Executive Director and founder of Ethical Leadership Center in Kenya. He's a well-established ethical leadership trainer with experience on public policy and youth governance. He is deeply committed in shaping value-based leadership in Africa and advancing accessible governance knowledge for young people. So over to you, Eddie, even as we tie the conversation about the role of the young people in ethical leadership. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm hoping I'm audible enough.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. One is to, summarize what the Dr. Kuali's keynote speech, as well as what my friend Kumalo has said. I think the whole thing is boiling down to how the society, the future of leadership is greatly dependent on what the society comments, as well as what the society condemns. If we condemn it in the long run, it will cease. But if we continue to entertain it, we are actually forming a system that continues to run how the society or rather how the society is run. My key point, I just wanted to contextualize one of the things that Dr. Professor Kwali mentioned, and especially in Kenyan context. And I hope this also cuts across the continent. Perhaps you can hear from other people who are in this call and are from other parts of the continent. Especially in Kenya, we've seen a trait on incentivization of members of the public to do what is their constitutional right. And a very classical example, and you will forgive me for my bias, but I will extract an example from a Kenyan context of a sitting member of parliament who was interviewed. And in his interview, he was questioned a number of how much he invested into getting to office. And the member of parliament confessed that he actually spent over 77 million Kenyan shillings for campaigns and mobilization. Now, I took that data from his mouth and I went to look from the Salaries and Remuneration Commission Kenya to look at how much does a member of parliament earn in Kenya monthly. And surprisingly, a member of parliament earns a gross of almost 700,000 Kenyan shillings. But when you had other commissions and allowances, that would bring it to a million Kenyan shillings. So every month, this member of parliament is pocketing a million Kenyan shillings. In 1 year, this member of parliament will have earned 12 million. In his 5 year tenure, this member of parliament will have earned 12, will have earned actually 60 million. Now, I was left with a question, just like you may have this question. If I invest 77 million Kenyan shillings into mobilization and campaigns, and my 5 year tenure will only give me 60 million, then it leaves all of us with a question: where do I get the money to, just balance my financial equation? And in the same interview, he confessed that the first thing a member of parliament will be thinking of as a step into office is to, how do I recoup? They will look at all means possible to recoup as much as they can, to do what? To, balance the equation, get return on investment. And I looked at it from the other end. So where could this money that he's spending on mobilization and campaigns going? And of course, there are a number of costs, but we know a greater percentage of that money goes to handouts. People have to be mobilized, and people have to be given money to show up and do what their constitutional right. And so, looking at it as a young leader, I don't see a legal or rather an institutional problem. I actually see, a systems problem, that the political aspirant as well as the citizen are playing their role effectively. And so, just as Prof is saying, is that if we are to really curb corruption in Africa, we need to look at it and take a multi-stakeholder approach in our strive to curb this. That means we'll have to mobilize, get to the government, get to civil society organizations, faith-based organization, and the society in general in helping us have a change in culture and a change of how we do things. And I felt as though that really resonated with me and what we are talking about today. It helps us see that you as a citizen, you as a member of the public, you have a role in helping us curb corruption, as well as those that in power. It's a problem that is caused both by the led and those that are in leadership. So I felt as though that really resonates with me and resonates with all of us, even as we reflect on corruption. As well, even as I conclude, I want to comment on something that we are doing as an organization. As you've heard, I am the team lead of Ethical Leadership Center. We are based in Kenya, and our goal has been to be at the forefront of championing ethical leadership and governance in our institutions. And we hope that these efforts will have impact even in the national level. And so one of the things we're doing is to just reiterate what Kumalo said, is that we know that the whole question of morals, the whole question of integrity is to a greater extent formed at these formative leadership stages. Yeah, as a young person, someone has been given an opportunity to lead in a university, someone has been given an opportunity to lead even as low as high school level, secondary school levels. You realize that leadership aspirations, leadership, those foundational leadership moral standpoints are formed at that level. And so our goal has been to look how can we come up with programs, how can we come up with materials, how can we develop systems that help leaders to be so anchored and grounded on ethics and value-based leadership in these formative stages of their leadership. We are currently doing our research targeting over 100 university student leaders association leaders to get to know what these aspirations formed prior to university leadership and what can we do to help raise young people who are anchored on integrity, accountability, and transparency. And I believe that the impact of these seemingly small efforts will have impact in the national level. I think that would be my comment. I will take it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Edward, and the wealth of experience that you bringing in the conversation and joining in with Kumalo in terms of, what is the role of the young people in terms of the issues of governance. One thing that Professor Kumalo actually talked about is how do we redesign our governance structures so that when we are talking about ethical leadership and issues of integrity, he mentioned that integrity needs no podium, you know integrity needs no podium. That means this is the responsibility for each and every one of us, individuals, but also through the systems that we work in to be able to inbuild, integrity and accountability mechanisms that are more sustainable into the system. So thank you so much, Kumalo and Edward, for your reflection. I want to tie this into now inviting our audiences from online to also just to hear from you in terms of what has been the conversation, and we are getting into a space of a workshop where we will invite you also to participate and to lead us in a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes conversation will be none other than Linda Kuvea. Linda Kuvea is going to moderate this workshop, and she leads the Rehearsa Core that is hosting this conversation, and she's a practitioner of systems thinking and future work. Linda is part of the Rehearsa team that developed the system information foresight methodology used to help individuals and organizations sense, shape, and shift complex systems. She's a facilitator in the System Futures community and supports social sector across Africa to imagine and build better future pathways. Please welcome Linda.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I really appreciate all the speakers that have come before me. And before I get on to the next activity, I just really want to show you what we're going to be working on now. If you check on your screen, you will see that we have a board. And on this board, we're going to have the next part of this conversation. And I want to thank our audience also for being here with us today. We have just heard really powerful insights from our keynote and from the panel as well. And now we're going to shift into a collective sense-making moment, something we call narrative transformation. And basically, narrative work matters because stories shape how we see and how we respond, as well as ultimately how our systems behave. And before systems change, stories have to change also. And our guiding question today, as you can see on the screen, which is our North Star, is what stories shape our relationship with corruption today? And what stories could reshape what our relationship with integrity tomorrow? Here we are not going to be looking for solutions or for blame. We are listening for the stories that we are living within. The stories that actually shape the way that we relate to power, to responsibility and possibilities. And this process that we're going to go through now in the next few minutes is actually adapted from the narrative transformation method by TFSX. And it's a tool that I really love because it helps us to listen beneath the headlines, beneath what we hear on the surface, getting into the deeper worldviews and the deeper metaphors that shape our leadership cultures. So we are going to explore the story that we are currently living inside and the story that we want to move into. This matters for us as Africans because, as Professor Kuwali also mentions in his book, where he talks about the whole of society ecosystem, he speaks about shaping beliefs, practices, expectations, and stories as a society. So let's get into it and let's see how we're going to do that. So on the screen, you are seeing our narrative transformation map. And on the left of it, you are seeing our current story. This is where we're going to be moving from the surface down into deeper layers. And then on the right, you see the future story that we want to create today, where we'll be rising from the deep metaphors at the bottom up to the visible signs of change at the top. And because our MyRobot is a view only, here is how we're going to work. So I'll be guiding us layer by layer, and our participants on YouTube, you'll share very short phrases in the live chat, just a few words to answer some of the questions that we'll be prompting there. And then a colleague from Riasa will also copy those phrases and paste them into the correct layer on the map in real time, and we'll all be able to see how our collective story will be emerging. And for each layer, we're going to take about 2 minutes, so I'll be going through quite quickly. That's why I asked for very short phrases. You really don't have to go into long paragraphs. Just make it short, raw, and honest. There are no wrong answers. All perspectives are really welcome. Okay, so we'll get into it now, and we'll start with the current story, the one many of us recognize and feel right now. So beginning at the surface, we are looking at the everyday story that actually shows up when corruption is mentioned. So here we are thinking about your country, your workplace, your community, your WhatsApp group, social media spaces, and thinking about what does the public actually say about corruption? What does the conversation sound like in the public? So please just type short phrases in the chat right now to answer these questions. And as we are typing, basically we are thinking at this point about what people say when corruption comes up. And we are also trying to figure out those phrases that everyone knows in the community. So there are things like corruption is normal, or if you pay, then that's how you get service, things like that. What are those voices that are dominating in our reality right now? We are also here thinking about all those things that we hear in taxis, in queues, on radio talk shows. I think Ed did mention that he had an interview from a member of parliament. So some of those things that we are hearing right now, this is what we are looking for at this moment. Okay. We can move on to the next We can move on to the next level. And in this level, now we are talking about systems and practices. We are talking about systems and practices. We are getting deeper now to talk about the patterns that actually reinforce the stories that we hear. So we just spoke about the stories that we hear. Now we are trying to find out what reinforces these stories. And here we are thinking about what the system actually does that keeps corruption alive. And again, let's type our short phrases in the chat. And here we are trying to figure out what everyday practices are making corruption alive in our reality today. And what are the patterns that are also repeating in institutions? Things like having to pay for a particular service to an individual, certain behaviors that actually make corruption feel predictable. I know in some spaces, getting a driver's license is not easy. Yeah, what are the stories that, what are the patterns that you see there in those institutions where citizens go to look for services? And what silent agreements allow corruption to actually survive? So those are the questions that we're having at this point, where we are digging deeper to look at what reinforces the stories that we hear. Yeah, so for example, we are also hearing about appreciation payments. I think Professor Kuwali also did mention something about appreciation payment being seen as normal. Yeah, what kind of patterns, similar patterns, do we see in our communities, in our workspaces, and in spaces where we also go to look for various services? It could be in government or other institutions. And maybe also thinking about where investigations start but never end in consequences. I think this is also quite common in most African countries as well. So let's keep writing our answer in the chat, and let's see what stories are emerging there. Let's keep sharing in the chat what are the practices and patterns that are coming to mind. And for the sake of time, we will move to the next layer. We still have one layer on the right side, which is our current story, before we move on to creating our future stories. So now on layer 3, where we are talking now about underlying beliefs, this is now going deeper again, deeper than the patterns. And now we are looking at the beliefs that sit beneath those patterns that we just identified now. And these are the assumptions that make the current story make sense. So again, in the chat, let's please type some short phrases to speak to what beliefs make corruption seem normal or expected. And what inner logic just shapes our expectations when we go to seek for particular services with different institutions. So things like power means taking over, or nothing will ever change. These are the kind of beliefs that people carry. So we're trying to find out what are those beliefs that people carry that perpetuate corruption. Maybe also things like leaders are meant to eat. Yeah, and I keep referring now to Eddie's example earlier on. If somebody invests, they need to see the return, isn't it? So what are those beliefs that we have about leadership? that actually feel common on our continent. And also, what beliefs about responsibility do we see emerging in our communities when it comes to responsibility? Do we hear people saying it's not my fight, or it's not my job to fix this? So those kind of beliefs that reinforce the idea that institutions cannot change. Those are the ideas that we are looking for at this level. And now we will move to the next level, which is the deep story. This is the deepest level now, where we are having to confront the emotional truth beneath the surface, beneath the deeper patterns and the structures and the systems that we are existing in. So here we are going to type again in the chat the type of images or metaphors that come to your mind when you think about corruption. So if, for example, corruption was a story, like who would be the characters in that story? And what kind of path would the story take? Yes. So those are the kind of questions that we are answering here at the deeper level. We are really looking at, like I mentioned, the emotional truth. And maybe it also feels like a leaking bucket, where water is just, you are putting in water and you are losing it. Or like a giant tree with rotten roots. Okay, thank you very much. At this deeper level now, we are looking at we are moving now from the current story to the threshold moment. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this workshop, the purpose of this activity is for us to understand what are those narratives that are coming up from the current story, the way that things are now. What are those stories? So now we're getting to that threshold moment where this is like a doorway between the story that we have now and the story that we want to create. So now I'm going to move quickly because of time. I will not be able to go through the whole through the whole process, but basically we have to build a different story. So we will start again at the very bottom, the deeper level. And in this deeper level, we begin at the accent at the deepest point with the future metaphor. And the future metaphor might sound something like, if integrity had a story, what might it be? And here we are looking at something like, maybe it's a well with a clean water for all of us. Or maybe it's a bridge that we build together. Or maybe a drum circle where every voice matters. So if we have those kind of deeper metaphors, they can now help us to also get to a point where we have beliefs around integrity protecting us and honesty being strength. And once we have those kind of beliefs, we also move to the next level, which is the second layer, where we are looking at future structures and behaviors. And here we'll be looking at how now do people behave in the future. If these are the metaphors and these are the beliefs, what kind of behaviors do we see now in the future? We are definitely going to be seeing transparent procurement. We will also be seeing whistleblowers being protected and not punished. and maybe also citizens involved in oversight. So those are the kind of behaviors that we can expect in the future if we have those metaphors and those beliefs from the bottom. Also, additionally, at the top now, at the surface, as we rise to the surface of the future story, the visible signs will become shorter queues, maybe as people look for government services, or maybe clear public budget that are also easy to understand and are accessible to everyone. So this would be the story at the end. So now I had to rush through that section to get to the very top of the future. And the themes that may actually come up in the future may sound like shared responsibility or protection for whistleblowers, or maybe strong institutions, and definitely new metaphors, new beliefs, new behaviors, and a totally new story. So thank you so much, everyone. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Linda, for taking us through that section of just thinking about, where are we now and how do we move to the future? What will be our story to tell in the next generation? What systems do we need? What mechanisms do we need to push us into into the future, even as we rewrite the story? And Professor Kuwali reminded us that governance structures must be redesigned. If we want to tell a different story, there has to be a redesigning. And so the behaviors, the cultures that we've mentioned, and the different phrases will help us to think through how do we redefine the future of governance. So we want now to just wrap this conversation. But before we wrap the conversation, I want us to write, what has been your key takeaway in this conversation? I think please do use the chat. Do let us know what has been your key takeaway from this conversation. But even as we wrap up, I want to give us the key highlights for these conversations that we've had since we had Professor Kumala, our colleague Edward, and Kumalo, who gave us the insights for young people. One of the things that has been echoed since this conversation started is the need for us to continue this conversation. We are saying that, yes, we must be able to condemn, but yes, we also must be able to commend those who are doing exemplary work, but also understanding that issues of integrity do not need an institution or a podium. It actually starts with our conscience. What is our belief? And really the role of Afrocentrism, when you're looking at Africa, what were the value systems that we had? The Ubuntu system that can be able to enhance the current systems that we are in. Are we way past talking about the Afrocentrism when you're thinking about issues of governance and corruption and ethical leadership? How can we bring this conversation back on the table? And it's very important. I think one speaker who was Kumalo brought in the aspect of information ecosystem. How do we ensure that we are not leaving anyone behind when we are taking issues of ethical leadership? Because it is important when you're thinking about the future, how do we bring in this conversation with the young people? What tools and mechanisms? How do we make this information more acceptable, or the more understandable by all the facets of the society? How do we ensure that the citizens are actually empowered and their voices are heard, so that then we can be able to strengthen the systems and mechanisms on issues of governance? I think one of the things that also is really a very strong takeaway here is leadership and culture is shaped over time. And even as we have discussed, and in the last activity we've had the workshop, that yes, we have a story that we are telling now, but how can we move into reshaping the story for the future? So it is imperative for us to look at what are those unethical behaviors that have been systematically embedded in our systems. And giving the example that Edward Moore gave, how do we ensure that those unethical behaviors are actually punishable by law? what systems and mechanisms, and Professor Kumali talked about issues of ensuring that, there's oversight institutions. How do we ensure that there's audit of, whether it is financial audit, but also even systems audit? Are they still fit for purpose? What are those conflicting institutions that we have in our countries? So I think, colleagues, what we are saying is we are providing a platform to echo this conversation, that we must continue this conversation on ethical leadership, looking at the governance structure from a lens of systems thinking, and how everyone comes along and ensures that the question is not about the individual, but rather also how the systems have been enabling corruption in our countries. And with that, I want to just appreciate our speakers for today. Professor Kumalu, Dan Kumalu, thank you so much for giving a reflection. And we want to say that you can you go online and read on issues on how the book that he mentioned about, and the 4 frameworks that he has recommended. Which are ARMS. That is the issues of accountability, responsibility, monitoring, and sustainability. Please go and read and engage further. I also want to appreciate Mr. Edward Moore, who also joined us from the Center of Excellence. Thank you so much, Edward, for giving us reflection on what you're currently focusing on and the aspiration to ensure that the young people are not left, and that the young people are actually, as they think about their future, how can they get into institutions and embed ethical leadership? And also, we want to appreciate Kumalo. Thank you so much, Kumalo, for jogging our minds and reminding us that the information ecosystem is paramount for this conversation, and how we can be able to adapt different mechanisms and tools. And we are in the society right now, we are talking about digital space. How can we be able to leverage some of these tools to ensure that this conversation does not just remain in the boardroom? And one takeaway that Professor Kumalo said, that our leaders are not just engaged in champagne taking. So with that, I want to invite Linda just to tell us a bit about a rehearsal and how we can continue this conversation in the different platforms. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is just to close. As we close, I would like just to bring us back to why we do this work as RIASA. So everything that we explored today, the stories, the beliefs, the metaphors, and the futures, sits at the heart of Systems Futures community. And that's the space where we have created for people across the continent and beyond who want to think differently about leadership, about complexity, and the futures that we are building as a continent. So if this workshop felt meaningful to you, I want to invite you to join us in our Systems Futures community. You can join as an explorer, our free tier that actually gives you access to practical tools, templates, guides, and learning resources, and also gathering spaces just like this one. And for those of you who are professionals in transition, moving between roles, sectors, or stages of your career, the Systems Futures community is actually designed to support you with the clarity, the skills, the networks, and the credibility that you need to navigate the complexity of change. We also support organizations through team plans that offer training, tools, canvases, and guided onboarding, and a whole lot more. And the work that strengthens collective leadership and to enable teams to make better and wiser decisions in complex environments. So for today, thank you so much. I hope that this conversation sparked something in you. And if something in the future story that we were looking at together feels alive, I really invite you to explore more and become part of the Systems Futures community. The link is shared in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now. Bye.